Welcome back to our pre-budget special, What the World Wants from India. Joining me now is Brian Jacobsen, Senior Investment Strategist with Allspring Global Investments. Now, Allspring has an emerging market equity fund which has 12% of its funds in India, with Reliance Industries and HDFC Bank ranking in their top 10 holdings. Brian himself heads the multi-asset team at Allspring. So, Brian, thank you for joining. And before I come to India and to the upcoming budget, what's your global pecking order in terms of asset classes, and what's the pecking order between developed markets and emerging markets?
So here at Allspring on my multi-asset team, we actually are coming into 2023 with a fairly balanced mix between equities and bonds. So if you think about 2022, everything seemed to sell off together. Balanced portfolios did not do very well. We think balanced portfolios can stage a comeback in 2023. But when we're thinking about within the equity portion of the portfolio, we're actually very bullish on emerging markets relative to, say, US markets. We think there are opportunities in the United States, mostly in the small cap value and large cap growth areas. But we're a little bit more excited about the valuation opportunities and the improving fundamentals in emerging markets.
Oh, that's good to hear. So now where is India in the pecking order in emerging markets?
Yeah, and so when we look at the broad spectrum of emerging markets, right, you have to look at it country by country. And India did very well over the last few months and even over the last year, especially compared to an area like, say, China. Now, looking forward, we do think that there is some good momentum in India. There's a lot of concern that, say, valuations are elevated in India relative to other areas like China. However, we think those valuations can be justified on the basis of the strong economic momentum that we see in India. And we're just hopeful that that momentum can continue to carry forward.
Okay, now let me come to the budget. How crucial is the budget for the Indian economy? What will you look for in the budget?
Yes, so I always love looking at the budget because it really sets the policy priorities for the government for not just the next year, but even the longer term policies. Going into the budget, there is a lot of expectation that we're going to see some structural reforms, some improvement as far as investment in, say, clean energy, manufacturing, improving labor market conditions, infrastructure investment in general. And so there's already a lot of expectation that we're going to see this type of investment in what will hopefully benefit India over the long term with growth. And that could then confirm the idea that India will continue to be one of the top growers in the emerging markets, not only for the next year, but even over the next multiple years.
Okay, got that. But how important is the fiscal deficit number itself? Will a high number scare investors like you?
When we're thinking about this as far as the fiscal deficit, as long as the deficit is for good reason, if you think about the government spending, if it's an actual investment in the future, that's not all that bad. So the deficit on its own doesn't matter as much as the quality of the spending that the deficit is helping to fund. So we're looking at probably around 6.4% as far as a percent of GDP in the fiscal deficit. And that seems to be about the consensus on Wall Street.
Yeah, I agree. 6.4 is for FY23, the current year, of course. But, some in India fear that this could be a typical pre-election budget. After all, the government goes into elections next year. So would that be the big scare, any budget giveaways?
The way we look at it is, yeah, we always have to be aware of when the elections are. And if it is a giveaway budget, and not just for India, but this applies to other countries as well, I would point to, say, like Brazil as being another example, is a big budget, if they do, say, disappoint where it's too high of a deficit, is it because it's a bunch of giveaways? that is typically viewed as being negative. Now, when we talk to the different credit rating agencies and different analysts as far as the expectations of the budget, right? It's a stable outlook. It's not viewed as being a giveaway budget, but if it does become one, we would view that as being a negative, and we would expect to see probably the currency go down in value relative to the US dollar, and probably also yields and interest rates move higher relative to developed market bonds.
Okay, now let me come to other issues. What are your thoughts on the Indian rupee? Are there any worries that it may depreciate a lot this year as well?
Yeah, so whenever we invest in a foreign company, you're also investing in their currency. So we always have to be aware of that currency translation. The weaker currency should have been beneficial to the export picture. Now, India as a whole still has a trade deficit. Maybe a lot of that can be explained by the high natural resource prices as far as imports of oil and the such. But from the company by company perspective, that weaker currency was hopefully a tailwind to their foreign earnings. Now, going forward, we actually do believe here at Allspring on my multi-asset team that the currency is likely to continue to appreciate or go up in value. So we view that as being beneficial as a US-based investor looking at if it goes up, if that company's stock goes up in rupee terms, and we can also get a gain on the rupee, we view that as a double benefit. That's our expectation. A lot of that does depend on the budget. Is it too big, which could then push the currency lower, and also monetary policy. Monetary policy to us looks like it's been very prudent, that they're getting close to the end of needing to hike rates because inflation has come down. So we actually have a positive outlook on the rupee for 2023.
Okay, well, actually, that is the consensus on the street. The rupee actually has appreciated even over the last couple of weeks, and people see it going even towards 80 or 79 by the end of the year. Okay, now your favorite sectors in India, Brad.
Yeah, so when we look at from a sector perspective, we work with some really talented portfolio managers. Allison Shimada is one of ours that they really focus on doing the individual stock selection and sector selection. So kind of from that very high level view that my team operates on, which is more the asset allocation as far as country allocation, we're positive on India. We're broadly speaking positive on financials as we go into 2023.
On that optimistic note, Brian Jacobsen, thank you very much for joining us. With this, we wrap up our pre-budget special, What the World Wants from India. We'll be back with more news and updates in just a bit.